Good, we are hitting on the hour, so let's see. We didn't do any marketing today for this particular call, and so do not sure really, well, do the reasons that super busy with the Ignite stuff, because we need to get stuff ready for next week as well, which also means that there's not a massive amount of things new things which we can actually talk about today. So I can show you something which is a part of a larger, let's say, demo setup for next week, but I can't go to more specifics with that one related on modern experiences and everything else. And we're going to talk about, and I'm going to do a quick demo also on the new CSM capabilities which went live last Friday. But let's do a quick setup on other things on the agenda, and obviously let's make sure that if there's any random questions which you want to go through, we should have plenty of time today for going audio, and we can stop earlier today if needed. So we'll have the miscellaneous announcements, random stuff, what I collected on slides, and then 2 different demos. I'll do them both today because we didn't actually explicitly prepare significant stuff for this week, do upcoming Ignite. And the Ignite is a massive deal, obviously, for SharePoint because this and the spring announcements are the main things for us in a year. So typically in spring, I think this time it was around 15th of May. Last time it was 4th of May. We released those videos and explained what's coming up, and hey, this is all the cool stuff, and blah blah blah. And then during summertime, we're polishing that stuff up and hopefully make it ready to go live in Ignite. Some of the stuff which you saw in the spring videos will go live on Ignite. Some of the stuff will go slightly later. Some of the stuff has gone already live. It slightly depends again on what is the exact topic. And obviously in this call, I cannot go to specifics which will go live and which will not go live. You will have to wait for next week. Now, excuse me. So a few things. Obviously, Ignite is a massive thing for us. And I do apologize that we haven't been able to prep humongous amount of additional material, but there's time for Q&A, and let's see if there's good questions. We can randomly talk about things which we can. Obviously, if it's a question around future stuff, I can't talk about some of that yet. Now, on to Ignite. If you're coming to Ignite, we do have 4 different specific breakout sessions. So these are 75-minute breakout sessions. There's additional sessions as well. So there's quite a few 45-minute sessions on SharePoint Dev, and there's also individual theater sessions in the expo area. So these are the specific sessions for Dev.
Oh boy.
And oh boy, indeed. Thank you. So these are the specific sessions on the which are 75 minutes in Ignite. So if you're coming to Ignite and you want to be up to date on what's happening on the SharePoint framework and modern customization, these are the sessions where you want to stop by. We'll start. Dan has a session on Tuesday around SharePoint development in enterprise. This is basically just 200 level session walking through what is the new stuff, what's coming up, what's in the queue for rest of the year. We have a lot of stuff. The list is actually surprisingly long, which will be coming either out on Ignite or coming out by end of the year. And Dan is walking through all of that stuff, so you'll be up to date on what we are promising to what happened. The second session on the slide is the Advancing SharePoint Developer Community. I'm not 100% sure about the title of that session, but obviously this is the once-a-year session where we go through more detailed on what is a SharePoint BMP, what has happened. This is not around summary, only as a summary. We will have cool announcements and new community initiatives announced on that session as well. Stuff which you can reuse immediately after that session or actually during next week within your projects to be more productive. So we are expanding our reusable components and controls model, and we're expanding a few other things as well. And in that session, we'll obviously talk about the modern end-to-end customization story for modern SharePoint sites. Then there's the Let's Build with SharePoint session, web parts, extensions, and much more. For the SharePoint BMP session, it's going to be me and Erwin van Hoonen. Erwin is in a call as well. For the next session, Let's Build with SharePoint, and that's going to be Luca from engineering, and then Paula Bialorsi from the MVP side, and that's around more on building stuff using web parts, client-side web parts, and extensions, and going through the extension details and what's coming up and what has been announced and all of that. And I can't confirm that extensions will be announced next week, but obviously I can't deny that either, so you can make your own conclusions out of that statement. The GA for extension has been pending for quite a long time, but I'm not going to explicitly say that that's going to happen next week. See, I'm an ex-consultant. I know how to avoid that trap. No, just a joke. And then the last session, building modern SharePoint experiences, best practices from Microsoft for developing. Yes, it depends indeed. For developing with SharePoint framework. This is a session where originally we were supposed to have Jackson Waldeck. Unfortunately, Waldeck has to cancel his trip on Ignite, so Waldeck unfortunately will not be in Ignite. So Jax is going to take care of that one on a Friday. I think around noon. That's one of the last sessions on the Ignite on Friday. But if you're interested on the SharePoint framework and SharePoint development in general, these are absolutely the sessions to drop by to see where we're heading and what's actually happening, because SharePoint framework is nowadays also in on-premises, so it is a massive deal for us, no doubt. Like mentioned, in 4 specific sessions in SharePoint development, we do have a SharePoint BMP booth as well. We will have BMP core team members, few additional MVPs in the booth answering on the questions as well. We will be sharing actually the booth area with Office UI Fabric people, and obviously please drop by if you have any questions around anything on the SharePoint development or anything around the SharePoint development in on-premises or in cloud. I'm more than happy to help on those. And we also have an Office pre-day as well. Now, let's move into the other topics as well. I'm just double checking that I'm not missing anything from the IM discussion. You're starting to speak like some of the American politicians. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dean. Working in an American company does have its own impact. Cool. Thanks, Patrick. So let's move into the actual topics, and I'll do, like mentioned, I'm going to do a few demos as we move along today, and then we should have plenty of time for Q&A if there's any Q&A questions. Let's see. Now, one of the things what we released pretty recently, typically we've been releasing the client-side object model version on a monthly basis. Now, do Ignite, we needed to flip slightly the schedule. So in August, we released a new version on the mid-August, and also in September, we released the latest version on last Friday. I'm not sure if you followed up on this one in the social media, but there is actually super cool new capabilities as part of the latest client-side object model version for SharePoint Online. And more specifically around the versioning information access. So using the latest version, you can actually access the data of a SharePoint list items in the previous version. So you can actually go back in time to the first version of a SharePoint list item, have a look on what was the value of that whatever field, and get that out from SharePoint if you need to do so. And that has been a super classic request. People tend to have that as a business requirement due reasons or another. So that's finally exposed in the CSM side. As part of this one, we also released well, at least we provided guidance on this one. This has been actually available for a while, how to get previous version of files from SharePoint Online. So as an example, if you need to export all of the, let's say, Word documents from a document library and their previous version, you can easily do that. So there is an API to do that using the client-side object model and writing with managed code. Technically, there should be, I haven't actually double-checked, APIs to make this happen also in REST. But our REST story is slightly more complicated, so to say, because the documentation is pretty horrible and it's not exposed using Swagger files, and we know all of these challenges which you might have if you're more familiar and would like to use REST as well. Oh, there is a REST API. Cool. Good. So somebody is confirming at least some of it, and version information available in the REST. Yes, that is available. If it's available in the REST already right now, these additional APIs should be exposed there as well. Now, our documentation on the REST side is pretty horrible. We're trying to get that sorted out, and we've been working on that one for quite a long time. There's multiple complications on that, and I do apologize on it. So we're trying to get that solved sooner or later. But for now, and for this particular call, let's concentrate on the season side of the story, and then try to figure out the future REST story, hopefully sooner or later. Good. So let's actually have a quick look on this one. So what I've done here is that in the blog post, where we announced that in the dev.ops.com, I copied some code from this small demo, but I can actually show you this directly from my UI or from my computer. So let me share my screen and let me walk through what we actually have here. So somebody needs to confirm whenever the screen sharing is working properly. Thank you, Bert. So let me actually go to one of my sites. So we're apparently using my own tenant for this demo, which is absolutely fine. So right now we're in a my tenant /site/theme site. I do have this versioning library here, which has a one document. I'm making this as simplistic as possible, so you can easily see the values and the behavior. So in this document, there is a document. We can actually go to the document. Let's do a small modification. Apparently open already in there. Let's actually do a quick modification on the document as well. Update it in the SIG call to demonstrate. There we go. So now we updated that. Let me click that one. I'll get back on the library. We can see that it was just updated a few seconds ago. We can absolutely also update this additional value. So if I select that document in a modern view, I can go, for example, another text or text field and update this one. SIG call updated value. So we can actually see to get access on those items as well. Now, if we scroll down here slightly, we can see that there's multiple versions of this item, and I think we should get to the version history. So we can actually see in the modern UI, which is good, we can see that there's actually 10 versions of the document. These two are the ones which I just did. So the one was for editing the document itself, which is part of the document library item, and this one was the field modification, where we can see that I updated the text, the field called the text field as a SIG call updated value. Good. So how would I actually get access on this? I will flip to Visual Studio 2017. I do have already a reference in the NuGet packages, so quickly showing that. So the latest version of the NuGet package, it's now actually coming from a local source, but just as well, it is exactly the same version which has been released in the NuGet as well. So 16.1 and 6906 is the exact version, and it's the Microsoft SharePoint Online season. So that has been added as a reference to my solution, and that means that I can then use these advanced new capabilities within my code. So the code itself is relatively simple. I'm going to put a breakpoints here so we can actually walk through what's happening, and we can start executing this one. So it's going to contact on that site using the client-side object model. And then we are actually getting access on that document library with the name version test doc. So just double checking that one. It is actually version test doc because it's me naming things in a weird way. So we're loading that. We're also loading an item ID 1, which I know that there is an item ID 1. You could just as well scroll down all of the items in the document library and then start outputting the values from there. We're interested also on the version information. We're interested on the file. We're interested on the file versions, and then we're loading all of these and doing the execute query to get everything loaded. So now, in the next piece, there's kind of two sections here. So I can actually access, and this is actually the new part, is the field values. So I can access individual versions, and now we have this field values collection exposed. And I can double check that if the text field has a value, I can actually get the version value. And as you can see, I can't actually zoom this properly. It is saying SIG call updated value as the value for that one. That's the current version of the item. So if we output that one to the console and take the previous version of that field, we can say that it's another update, which was the previous version of the field value for that particular item. And obviously that means that if we're scrolling that through, we can scan and get the output, in this case to the console window, where we can see all of the different values which that particular field had for the list item, which is actually pretty cool. Now, getting the the documents out and the actual version information out. This has been exposed for a while already in SharePoint Online. It, however, has not been properly documented, and we do apologize on that one. That is technically a resourcing challenge always. But I can access the file versions, and with the file versions, we have an open binary stream. And with this one, we can do something as simple as, let me open up side by side. Let me actually get rid of my previous version of the documents. I can just save that file directly, for example, for my disk, and do this one by one. Connecting to SharePoint Online, there we go, and get that one on the file system, and there's the previous version, and doing an F5 will actually get all of the versions out. And there we go, and now if I open up, I'm not sure actually which one of these is the latest version. Is that the oldest version, or is it the latest version? This is actually the latest version. So we can see the updated SIG call value which we're updating. And that's actually pretty cool. So we are basically now exposing all of the needed version information, the file information, and also the field value information in SharePoint Online for whatever business reasons you might have related on accessing this information. These were really highly requested capabilities using in the user voice, and it's great to have them actually closed in the user voice as well. Now, kind of related on that one, I'm going to pinpoint that one quickly. So if I go SharePoint user voice, and I'll show you the admin UI on this one. We are actively working on making sure that, for example, all of your dev requests, if they're getting enough items and if they're getting enough votes, we're trying to get them solved as fast as possible. There's certain scenarios like the taxonomy field, REST API, we absolutely understand that has to happen. For time being, there are complications of making that happen, which are slightly more complex than we can get them solved in a short time frame. We are aware of that request, and we are working on making that resolved. But as an example, the list item version history, so I'm going to copy that link from here. This had 418 votes, and obviously we really wanted to make this happen for you based on the number of votes and based on the number of the demand. So if you're looking into having something like capabilities in SharePoint and you think that there's a high demand from the other customers as well and the partners and your employees, please add an entry on the user voice and then, for example, just use your internal DLs in your company to send an email to everybody saying, hey, go there, vote. And if the votes will go up, it will definitely have an impact on our prioritization of fixing these things. Good. The next thing what I had on the agenda was around this, the modern site provisioning. We did a demo on this one actually last time as well, but this time I wanted to actually show you a slightly more polished version of the thing. So let's actually have a look on that. So I'm going to flip again to another tenant. And this tenant is absolutely fine. So I'm in a Splat tenant. So let me go to the SharePoint welcome page. I'm not going to do a full automated creation of the site remotely and all of that. I'm going to rather modify a site which the end user has already created. You can absolutely create a site using remote APIs as well, but I'm slightly simplifying the demo. We'll have more on, there will be announcement and stories and everything else around the site provisioning in next week in Ignite, which I can't go into right now. So that's why I'm keeping this relatively simple. So, but I wanted to actually show that this is definitely possible. So I'm going to create a modern theme site. Let's call this SIG call demo modern, doesn't really matter. And we're going to create that. There's a policy. This is absolutely top secret stuff. So I'm going to click next. The site is getting created. It's a modern site, so it's getting created in a matter of seconds, which is pretty cool. It's still pretty amazing how fast the site is available, comparing to the fact that we used to force to wait for minutes and minutes and minutes, and you never knew how fast they were coming. So here's my modern team site. I could obviously manipulate this manually and all of that, but we can absolutely use our remote provisioning engines and the remote APIs to modify and push out our customization to these sites. And in this case, we're going to push out a web part, and we're going to push out an extension. And I'm going to explain how that's actually happening here. But for simplicity reasons and to other reasons, the story will be slightly more interesting next week. I'm going to use a PowerShell for this one. So I'm moving into my Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio Code, which is my favorite PowerShell development engine. And in here, I'm going to actually connect to that.
Talking to SPC. He's talking to SPC.
No, I'm not talking about SPC. I'm talking about Ignite. Somebody unmuted. There we go. Ignite is next week. So what I'm doing here is that I'm connecting to using the SharePoint BMP PowerShell. And I'm connecting to that previously created site, which I just created manually. And like I said, we can create these sites using APIs as well. I'm just making this super simplistic as possible. So let's actually do this. I'm going to do an F5 so we get that variable in the memory. I'm going to connect there using the BMP online. And in this case, because I don't have an existing credential stored, I'm going to actually write them in here. And this was the splat on Microsoft.com is the user ID, and there's my password. And hopefully we get properly into the site, and that should be kind of given. So now if I do, let me actually zoom this up. Sorry for the for not doing that immediately. So I can probably see more easily what's actually happening here. So now if I do get BMP site, we can confirm that we are connected using the BMP PowerShell. Now, the big difference, just to clarify this, you might be super familiar with BMP PowerShell versus the SharePoint Online PowerShell, but the SharePoint Online PowerShell is the native as part of the stuff what engineering is doing. And with that one, you're always manipulating and connecting to the admin URLs. So you're always controlling and manipulating your sites through the tenant perspective, from a tenant perspective. Now, in the BMP PowerShell, you can actually connect to the individual sites, and you can create lists, and you can do a lot of other stuff as well. If you're a developer, you might be wondering that, hey, wait a minute, so why would a developer be interested on the BMP PowerShell? Well, basically, because BMP PowerShell is using code underneath itself. It's using client-side object model, REST APIs, and all of that. And it's a super easy way and convenient way, for example, to define automations in the Azure functions, which then can be called using storage queues and REST APIs and everything else. But using the PowerShell, you can easily modify your scripts in a matter of seconds. You don't need to compile. So in this case, what we're doing is something relatively simple. So I'm going to show you the template in a second, but we're now connected on that site, and I'm going to apply this template to the site. And this is my magical modern welcome page template. So I'm going to do here an F8. And by the way, there was a good comment that Visual Studio does PowerShell, and yes, it does. You can even see that it has a theme which is mimicking the ICE, which is pretty cool. So here we go. I'm applying a BMP provisioning template, and this is an XML. I'm going to show you that in a second. But now we applied configurations on the site which we just created. And now if I go to that site, back in the site, and if I do a refresh, something magical actually has happened within the site, if everything went well, and everything indeed went well. Now, what's interesting on what actually happened, we modified the welcome page based on our business requirements, which is such a typical thing within a SharePoint. I want to have a standardized template, which is a Condoso template, which has basic things. We did that. We also modified the actual web parts which are on the page. The key points here, however, also notice is that we've added a third-party web part on a site automatically without doing anything, or just by applying the template. Plus, we actually added a customized footer, which is Condoso Confidential, powered by Microsoft SharePoint Online 2017. So we actually pushed also SharePoint Framework extensions to these sites. And I'm going to quickly walk through how this is working, and want to also make sure that, well, there will be plenty of time on Q&A. But this actually proves, hopefully, for you as well, that you can use templating systems with the modern sites. There are certain things which will make this even easier, which will be announced next week. But how we actually make this happen is that we have obviously the third-party web part and the SharePoint Framework extension. These have been already deployed. So these have been deployed. If I refresh my application app catalog, I have here those two fellows which are being visible. It's that one and that one, which are Contoso footer and that my React to the web part. So those are the two things which are actually getting automatically applied on the welcome page of the site. For both of these items, we have set the tenant scope deployment to be true. And what it means is that now, from an end-user perspective, the web part is automatically available within the site, even though we haven't installed anything on the site. So you can see that there's no applications being installed, but regardless of that, if I add a page on the site, and if I start adding content on this page, we can actually see that our custom to-do web part is available in here, and I can actually start using that. And that's because of the tenant scope deployment option. So as part of the installing the solution to the app catalog, boom, the web part will be available across the whole tenant. And that's super cool. We don't actually need to install that to the actual site. Now, the next thing here is then the footer. How did we get our custom footer available on the site? Obviously that's a SharePoint Framework extension taking advantage of the page placeholders. For that one, we did something similar. So this one has the tenant scope deployment option enabled, which means that the extension is kind of ready to be used across all of the sites within my tenant. But then we need to enable that explicitly within a tenant by using remote APIs. And how we actually made that happen was that if I go back in my PowerShell, and if we open up this Visual Studio, if we open up the template, the actual template which we applied as part of the PowerShell, and let me actually I think the Monokai is probably more readable. So I can flip on the theme. So in here, if we have a closer look on what's actually happening, so this template has been created by exporting values and then slightly few modifications manually. The template structure and the schema is documented completely. If we have a detailed look on what's actually happening here, we have a client-side page called Home. We're saying overwrite true, which means that we are overwriting the existing home page from a site. Then we do have two sections. We have a section 1 with one text box and text field, and then we have a section 2. If I go back on the site, let me do this and show you the welcome page. And click here. There's the section 1, which has a text field with the Welcome Contoso team site and a link over there. If I go back on my template, we can see that there's a one column type section. It has a Welcome to Contoso team site text. That's essentially making that section happen over there. The next row, we have two sections, or this section has two columns to be precise. So if you go back in here, we have a section. Order is number 2, that's the second. The type is 2 column. And in here, we have a few different web parts. We have a Bing map web part, and we have a text web part, and then we have a custom web part. The custom web part is the one which is visible in here as a to-do web part, and then we have a few texts, and that's the Bing web part visible on the left side. So how do we do this is that in our engine, in the remote provisioning engine, and where is my scrolling? Hey, where's my vertical scroll bar? There it is. We can reference the control ID, and this control ID is unique for that particular web part. So the control ID is basically the manifest ID of the third-party web part, the custom web part. Because the web part has been installed to the app catalog with the tenant scope being enabled, we don't need to do anything more than say for SharePoint that, hey, we want to have this web part on this page by assigning the right control ID here, and then we're saying that it's in the column number 2. Which is correct, and it's in the order number 2, which is correct because we actually have a text box in here, text web part in here. I can actually show you that. We have a text web part in here, and then we have our third-party web part. And then after that, we have one more section available. And how did we get this whole XML? We actually got the XML by exporting. We used the PnP provisioning engine to export a welcome page on my customized site, and then I stored that as an XML, and now I'm applying that all the time to the site. Now, there was one more additional thing which I didn't explain, so let's actually have a look and concentrate on that one. So that's the welcome page, but there was the extension, so the footer section in here, which is hovering all the time there. So that is taking advantage of the page placeholders, which are in the SharePoint Framework extensions. And we got that one deployed already in the app catalog using the tenant scope option. But then we need to activate that in a site. And how do we activate that in a site is that in the BMP provisioning, or if you want to use CSAM or if you want to use REST, that's absolutely fine as well. The BMP provisioning just makes this super easy. We are associating a new user custom action or a custom action with the right client-side component ID. Again, this is referring to the manifest ID of the SharePoint Framework control, and that is getting activated in the location of Application Customizer because it is a SharePoint Framework extension which is getting activated on the site. And this way, because it is tenant scoped extension, it will light up on the site automatically because there's a user custom action which is saying that, hey, whenever a page is getting rendered within this site, anywhere within this site, which is the key point as well, I can go to the site contents. We can still see the same footer and extension being visible. I can flip to pages list view. It doesn't really matter where I am. If I'm in the modern experiences, that extension is getting rendered because we tell SharePoint that, hey, there is this application customizer. Please execute the application customizer. The application customizer itself is then responsible for saying, hey, I want to actually write something on the placeholder in here. And that's how we essentially make the whole thing happen. So this way, you can absolutely push any updates on the modern pages. Well, I would say, well, you can, any updates is obviously debatable, but you can push certain updates to this modern experiences as well. Next week there will be more talking about the themes. We actually announced the modern themes already in some level. There will be obviously an API support for some of that stuff as well. Do we actually, is it that one? No, it's not that one. Okay, the modern themes is not that one. I can't remember if it's already public or not. But there's already APIs available in the latest CSAM for some of that stuff. We'll show more on that next week. There will be additional things available as well, which you can take advantage. And there was I think it was Chris O'Brien. I didn't check if Chris is on the call. One of the requests from Chris O'Brien was to have page layouts on the modern pages and modern sites. I'm not going to tell, maybe something's going to be announced next week, so maybe not. But basically what we're doing here also is that we are pushing our specific custom page layouts, standardized layouts for all of the sites by using the templating system and the engine and the remote provisioning model to be standardized for every single site which is getting created, which is pretty cool. Or in this case, we apply the template on a site which we manually created, but you can absolutely automate that as well. Good. That was all related on that one. How many questions did I miss? I think Bert or somebody was answering at least some of the questions. What if the site has a mixed content like classic pages and modern pages? Yes, awesome question from Rahul. Now, that's still kind of debatable thing. Now, let me be super clear on this one. This is a modern group site. Let me actually jump to a team site. So this is actually classic team site. So if this classic team site has been slightly modified. So I've modified actually the welcome page of a classic team site. But typically, if it's a classic team site, let's actually go back on the original status, which is this one. So the home page is a classic. So now if I actually go back on the welcome page of this classic theme site, it looks like a theme site. It feels like a theme site, and it makes you feel sad, kind of, because it's old school. It's not as polished as the modern experience is. Now, this is where it actually gets kind of tricky, and I think we partly failed on some of this messaging as well. The SharePoint Framework extensions, they work in the modern experiences. if you need to do similar experience and customizations in classic pages, you would have to fall back on classic user custom actions or JS link capabilities. So the difference is really on the experience perspective. It's not on the site type, because you can actually have a modern theme site where you still have a classic page. You can still create a classic page in the modern theme site. If you do that, and if you mix and match, you will then need to have both kind of customizations. You will need to have modern SharePoint framework extensions, and then also the user custom action based customization, so the old school customizations in SharePoint Online. And that might get actually slightly complicated. So obviously, if possible, you want to make sure that you drive towards a one single standardized setup within your tenant. Is it classic? Is it modern? That's up to you. You'll decide on that. Obviously, we would like you to use the modern, but there are valid business cases why people still want to use classic. If this is a classic theme site, how do I flip this to be kind of a modern feeling? I don't need to do anything more than flip, for example, go to the site pages, and this can be done programmatically really easily as well. Welcome page, make home page, that is a modern page. So now if I get back on the welcome page on the home, it looks like a modern site. And I can absolutely modify how the page actually looks like as well. The only difference within this case with this classic site would be that this classic site does not have a group associated to it after this operation. But that's something which we already demonstrated in the spring event, that's coming in the SharePoint Online as well. So you can associate Office 365 groups to existing theme sites. And that way you can actually kind of unblock all of the other things within the modern experiences as well. But classic theme site looks like, feels like a modern theme site because it is offering the modern experiences. It is consistent. And if I go to the site contents or lists and libraries or the welcome page, I'm always getting the modern experience. Okay. Currently, modern pages won't adapt to classic site branding. You're absolutely correct on that, and it will never do that. So the modern pages will never actually adapt or support the classic, let's say, .master page based on customizations, or CSS, embedded CSS, or injected user custom actions. It will never do that. There will be additional ways of achieving similar kind of capabilities, not necessarily the same craziness as with the classic .master page, because the .master, even though it's super convenient in certain scenarios, it actually is causing magnificent harm or can cause harm for the customers as well. So the modern experiences will never support .master. Will it support alternative layouts? Absolutely. How we are achieving those alternative layouts, that's a different discussion. So we're kind of we're no doubt still in the transition phase between the classic and modern, but we're getting there, and this starts feeling pretty okay already. There was a good comment from Chris Kent, who's in this call. I think I saw Chris here as well. One of the downsides currently in the modern experiences, which we're already looking into, is the fact that in certain scenarios we are actually showing this for the end user, and there's no tenant level switch to flip and disable that link, because in many cases, especially for new customers and new end users, if they would never know about the capabilities what are in classic, they would be super happy with modern, because the modern is evolving all the time and the capabilities within modern is evolving. We know that there's gaps, there will be more additional things all the time, but we're getting already on the stage or level that what if we would be fully modern, and we can automate the welcome pages, we can automate all of that stuff, and we can automate what's being here, we can push out our extensions. The story starts feeling pretty okay, doesn't it? So the SPFX do work on modern pages in classic sites. Yes, correct. So to be super clear on Russell's question, SharePoint framework extensions do work on the modern experiences, regardless of the site type. So the site type, is it classic theme site or modern theme site, that does not have any meaning on what's being supported. It's extensions, modern experiences, regardless of the site type, user custom action, classic experiences, regardless of the site type. That's what it essentially means. Good. I think that sums up. I'm just quickly scanning if there's any random questions which I absolutely missed. You can please do set them in the Ion window. I have multiple screens, so I've missed probably a few of these. How can we access font details from the current theme, both in modern and classic sites? It's different. It depends. Not a straightforward answer, unfortunately. I don't want a custom master bar. I just want a top bar to be same color. You can control the top bar. You mean this bar in here? You can control that bar actually from a tenant level settings. You can absolutely go to the admin settings and modify that to be certain color already today. So. But I have different sites in the tenant. So if I want to have a different color per site in the tenant, yes, okay, then it gets slightly more complicated. Absolutely. There's ways to achieve that in modern experiences, but you would actually, on Darren's let's say comment, absolutely understandable comment. We know the story. I've done that when I was working in Field because I'm an ex-Field person, and we know how to make that happen. You'll just inject or access the DOM structure in here using HTML and JavaScript, and then you modify that style to be something other depending on the structure of the site, as an example. Now, the challenge of doing that is that then you have a dependency on the DOM. You are assuming that color scheme and that top level bar will have the exact same structure in the future as well. Whenever we change that, because we will change that, your customization will break. And why are we changing that? Well, we're changing that because it's not just SharePoint. The same bar is actually there for any of the other applications as well. And in the same way as SharePoint, this bar is evolving all the time. So let's say from an engineering thinking perspective, the thinking is that this bar here should be out of control and should not be modified based on the content of the below section. You cannot do that in any other applications than in SharePoint Online. In SharePoint Online, technically you can do that because it's just a matter of injecting JavaScript on the page and making that happen. It's not recommended, however, because this one will be evolving. We already announced again a new design for this one, and you'll see that one, for example, in the Ignite videos and in the Ignite next week. So this one is evolving. I think I saw a Twitter tweet where they already had a screenshot and explanation on what will happen on this section in here. Good. It makes CSS achievable. Well, obviously you can always write CSS, overwrite CSS styles as well. The challenge of that one is that whenever somebody, that team who's responsible of the suite navigation and suite bar in here will change the suite bar, most likely your CSS will no longer work. And then whoever customer will call somebody and be angry that, well, they probably will be angry for Microsoft, which is fair, which is relatively typical, that now my SharePoint Online is again broken. So it's not a straightforward thing, and that's one of the reasons why we would like people to actually do only modifications using, for example, the page placeholders and modern extensions, because we guarantee that this will be here and we don't break you, rather than doing HTML DOM level structural changes in the suite navigation. We know that you can do that, but we wouldn't like you to do that. But we can't really restrict you for not doing that either. Just quickly reading Rolf's comment around. So the question why there needs to be a classic style of branding at all, since my take is upon a hammer, but you. I think Rolf comments is around classic discussion on the level of branding, what needs to be done, how people are so used to do customizations in SharePoint, and then versus the direction where we're heading. That's understandable comments. In future, we'll have a best practice method to show hide modern page elements such as the left navigation based on the criteria, like we used to do with CSS and jQuery. On Ross's question, that would be something, well, we know the requirement. I can't promise that it's going to be delivered. If there will be a demand for those things, like capabilities of hiding the left navigation easily based on criteria, if there's a demand, that will be absolutely delivered. Now, the demand doesn't mean an IM message in a Skype discussion. It means that if we would actually go to user voice, and then we can get additional votes on additional placeholders and connectivity and functionality, we can make those happen. I have not tempered master base based on advice, but I don't want to clutch to change the top bar color to keep branding consistent between pages. Yeah. And Darren, I absolutely understand the story on these things. This isn't really straightforward either. And especially a lot of the customers are moving from on-premises, SharePoint deployments from on-premises to SharePoint Online. In on-premises, we used to do whatever. And yes, you can absolutely do that in SharePoint 2016 still. You can go crazy with the master base designs. In SharePoint Online, the direction is slightly different. And the reason for moving to that direction is to make sure that there's no, well, I wouldn't say that's the wrong way of putting that, to reduce the challenges of customizations blocking new features to be enabled for customers. Because we saw that quite a lot in SharePoint Online as well. Customers had a crazy master pages at some point in SharePoint Online, and then some of the new functionalities were not there. And then they were escalating and they were angry because, hey, this new functionality which was announced in Twitter, it's not available in our tenant. And then we investigated the why isn't it there? Well, it's because they're using a custom master page, which is blocking them to get access on the new capabilities. And that's not an optimal situation either. We need to find that kind of a right balance and right compromise for getting access on latest and greatest, and then but still have flexibility on the branding. And I think obviously we're in journey. We need to understand it's challenging for us in engineering, it's challenging for you, it's challenging for customers, and we'll need to find the right way of doing that. What is the recommended practice for top nav in modern site collections? So you can absolutely use the page placeholders. Extensions will go GA quite soon, which has been hinted quite a few times. Or there might or might not be additional announcements on possibilities of a top navigation in upcoming week in Ignite, but I can't confirm or deny if that is the case. Usability is the issue. If someone is expecting it and it's not there, then where do they go and how? Yes. So the problem obviously is that if customers are used to something to be somewhere, they want to have that one there in the future as well. So the change management is always challenging. Is the Office UI Fabric UI can be used for modern? Is Office Fabric UI can be used for modern sites? Yes. So the modern sites are using Office UI Fabric UI. So all of these are Office UI Fabric components and controls. Now, there are certain recommendations related on how would you implement your web parts and extensions which are using Office UI Fabric to avoid challenges when Office UI Fabric is evolving to new versions. And that is documented in dev.office.com. It's not a straightforward story. We're working on getting that cleaner as well in the future. Right now, it's well, I would say even that it's a relatively nasty story in a certain sense. But Fabric can absolutely use, well, that's a fair comment from Russell. Fabric can be used in classic sites too. Yes, you can have a modern web part in a classic theme site. Absolutely, and classic experience absolutely works. So in here, as an example, if I go back on my site contents, and if I go back to site pages, we did have that to-do web part live. So if I go to classic experience, homepage, that's a classic homepage. If I edit this one, we can actually see a Fabric components in this site as well. So let's add a web part. Let's get rid of this site. Oh no, well, just as well. Let's get rid of that one. So I'm going to put my web part on it there. Let's do 2 columns and let's add a web part from the web part gallery. If I can actually locate that, because this classic gallery is relatively complex, under development, to-do web part, and that one, and there's my Fabric experience and a modern web part in the classic UI. Absolutely works, and that's meant to be working as well. And you can also have SharePoint add-ins in the modern experiences as well. So if you are dependent on add-ins, add-ins are fully supported, will be fully supported in future. Add-in web parts, absolutely suitable option. We are investing on add-ins in the future as well. They are different, slightly different than in SharePoint framework, but it has a story as well. And we're looking into integrating the SharePoint framework in a way that you can write easily add-in parts as well using the SharePoint framework. But there's a Fabric components rendered and the web part, modern web part being rendered on a classic page. Good. Office UI Fabric UI Core is not currently supported for SPFX, as I understand. You're absolutely correct. There's certain ways of making that happen. We're kind of appending within those documents, but yeah, it's a work in progress. You can use the Office Fabric and Classic, yes, Fabric Classic. And I'm reminded that that release shows that there's over 100 million Office 365 seats out there using the bits. I would think twice at least before second guessing the existing UI for your org. That is fair comment from Ralph, yes. There are many reasons why people want to use the classic or move to SharePoint Online with a classic experience, and then maybe it's a change management challenge. Retrain 45,000 or 250,000 employees from a classic to modern. That is actually superbly expensive. Unless your chosen path is that, hey, push them there and they will learn. That's one option as well. So, any other questions? I'm doing now live demos based on a request, apparently, which was one of the intentions of today as well. We can close slightly earlier as well, if that is the case. And if there's not any more questions, because we didn't have any other topics on the presentation either. So should I be using modern team sites for intranet? Well, for intranet experience, I would be looking, it's not a straightforward answer and it's not a straightforward question either, because everything depends. So if the experience, if the experience is what we currently provide from a communication side or from a team side, if that is sufficient for your intranet, you should absolutely use that. So why not? Because then you are in the modern platform. If your requirements, however, dictate certain scenarios which are not currently possible in a communication sites, and they can be achieved in a classic WCM sites, publishing sites, please do use them. Publishing sites will be absolutely supported. The classic publishing site will be supported. We're not pulling a rug or a mat underneath those sites. And yes, this is the new UI for provisioning sites, the native modern UI. And obviously I can create a communication site, com site, and I think that's available. Let's actually create a top secret site. And let's get that one created. If the communication site template is sufficient for your internet requirements, absolutely use this. Why not? If it's not sufficient, then you need to figure out alternative options. And this is absolutely available right now. So any tenant, this is normal dev tenant, which I'm using right now for demos. Nothing special enabled on this one. And this is pretty cool. Yeah. So there's a lot of capabilities, or from a classic requirement perspective, and I can shuffle things, and I can modify obviously the icons. I can do a lot of other stuff as well. There's a news capabilities, there's the events capabilities, documents, all of that. So. The question is, so I go to site contents and say new site. Nope, you go to the SharePoint welcome page. So if you go here and SharePoint, and then in the SharePoint landing, what is this? This is home, SharePoint home page, if I remember the correct term from a marketing perspective. And from here, if you start creating sites, you'll get to this new experience. And we're looking into announcing support for API support for communication sites pretty soon. That's in the roadmap as well, and PowerShell support for that one as well. It might or might not happen again next week. Who knows? it was next week something interesting. Maybe there was some sort of a big conference. I can't remember. Some of the new stuff will be coming next week, obviously, and some of the new stuff a few weeks after. And let's move on. And Ralph has a good comment. So play with it, get familiar with the capabilities. Absolutely. Yes, so Darren's comment is absolutely valid. So these theme sites cannot exist under an existing site collection. You're absolutely correct on that. So, which is a pity, obviously, but these are individual site collections in the SharePoint Online. And Ralph comments on the business requirement analysis. Good. But if there isn't that many additional questions, just to kind of reiterate on this one. So in the template, the BMP PowerShell was the fellow which we used for applying the template. The template was actually created using by exporting from an existing site, and we were able to push out our SharePoint Framework extensions to modern sites. We got the modern sites to be nicely modernized based on our business requirements up to the certain level. If the business requirement would have been that, hey, I want to have some crazy layout here, which is hiding that one and hiding all of those and making this purple and sparkle and blinking and everything else, then maybe that's not possible. And maybe then we need to fall back on the classic publishing sites and then do something crazy. So quickly, there is still a UI confusion regarding the creation of a collection or a subsite. Yes, I am unfortunately highly aware of that, but we'll see when we get those things moving. We'll be getting ability to create a com site from the admin center as the organization has turned off self-service creation in the SharePoint home. Yes, absolutely. So communication sites are coming in a more wider support relatively soon as well. Relatively soon, you can figure out, get the conclusions out of that statement. Is there a way to convert classic pages to modern pages? On Rahul's question. So this one is an interesting question. We still have a few minutes. This one, obviously, technically, answer is yes. You can technically do that, or what you would be doing is something similar as what we did actually in where's my our team site in this classic sample team site. So this is a classic team site. Now the challenge of doing an automatic conversion is that the modern pages actually are different and they support different things than the classic pages, and there's a different set of web parts. So there's no the web parts, the set of web parts in the modern pages is completely different than it was actually in the classic pages. And these things support something like sections. So I can absolutely add. Let's actually modify this one to be 3 sections, and I can add additional. Where's my additional section? Additional section. And additional sections. So there's multiple things what we can do in the modern sites, which is completely different than in the classic. The classic has a certain set of layouts, and you need to follow up on that. Technically, you can kind of figure out what would be the comparison here. Then the next challenge would be, okay, can you do a mapping of 1-to-1 based on the web parts? And the answer is not really. The web part selection is different. The capabilities of the web parts is different. So will Microsoft at some point provide a native capability for migrating classic pages to modern pages? The answer is no, because we do not want to take that responsibility, because potentially you might lose some content, because if you do make some sort of an automated guess on this web part, that there, and put there, yes, if you can match the business requirements of that migration, absolutely feel free to do so. We, from a Microsoft perspective, we can't really take that risk that somebody would be losing the data due to the difference between the experiences. Good, and Bert has an awesome comment on that one. This would be a nice community effort, no doubt. Can you not enable the site pages on an existing site or create a modern pages and update the home page? Yes, exactly what we did here. So this is a classic theme site where we have actually gone to the site contents and site pages library. And in the site pages library, I can even do this manually in here. I can flip back on my classic page and make that as a home page, and voila, that page is now this site's home page. But just as well, I can create a new page from here. Let's call this new home and save. And let's click publish as well, and I can go to site contents. And you can absolutely do this using APIs as well. So I go to the site pages. Where's our new page? New home, new home, new home, new home. There's the new home, and flip. That is now our home page. So now if we go back in home, yay, we have a new home page. Good. A news feed, that's still a thing. I think the old one is way different. Yeah, I'm not going to even start that discussion because we're running out of time. Could comment from Rolf. Anyway, absolutely doable. You can do the migrations. You need to figure out the rules, how to do the migration of the pages automatically. There is a risk of making that happen. So, so that's the reason why we, from engineering perspective, we're probably never going to actually do that, because the one-to-one mapping between the web parts doesn't exist. Now, if there would be a configuration files, everything else, and a community-driven effort, absolutely makes sense. But I think that sums up the webcast. I did a 45-minute live demo monologue on modern experiences, which is pretty okay. I was hopefully able to answer some of your questions. Next week, follow up on what's happening in Ignite. There will be cool announcements, cool demos, cool things. If you are in Ignite, please drop by and let's have a chat in the BMP booth. Have a great rest of Thursday, have a great weekend, and please keep the feedback coming using the social media channels and the user voice. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining, and let's stay in touch. Bye-bye.